we're going to look at how to dry the flowers that we have all around us in our gardens, and it gives us a great opportunity to go out and have a look and see what's growing, see how it's doing, see what we would like to keep. And the idea of drying them means that we can keep those flowers preserved until the autumn, until the winter, so that at the time when we don't have lovely fresh flowers, we can use these dried flowers anytime to make floral arrangements. So what we're going to talk about is methods of drying them, different sorts of plants that we can dry successfully, but a lot of it is a bit of adventure. So you don't have to stick to rules. You can just be trying different things. But I'm going to show you some of the flowers and plants that I've dried this summer, so it gives you an idea of what might be successful. So let's start off with how we do it. Well, the thing is to go around the garden, perhaps in the morning on a dry day. Don't go out in a rainy day, you probably wouldn't anyway, but go out on a dry day and pick some flowers and that are a reasonably long length. So you can probably see the length I've got here. Now, what we're going to do is to remove any leaves, because they'll just turn brown and fall off and not be very nice. What we're trying to do is just to keep the flowers. So I'm going to take off these leaves here and snip them off where they're really big, so that I've got a nice clear stem. Take off any bits that have been cut before or don't look nice. So I've now got, I'm just doing it with 3, but you might have a lot of stems together. And what I prefer to do is to keep the different varieties of plant that I'm using in one bunch. So I'm not going to mix up these particular flowers, which are called persicaria and are flowering right at this moment. I'm going to just keep those as a bunch. I'm going to put them together. Now you can use an elastic band and wind it round tightly, because what we're going to do is to hang these up to dry. And if we do that, what we're going to do is to keep some of the colour of the flowers, so that when we do our floral arrangements or whatever we're going to do with them later on, we're not just going to have brown seed heads and flower heads, we're going to have slightly coloured flowers, which reminds us of what they were like when they were fresh. So I've wound it round tight. You could also do this with twine. So here's twine. If you tie it up with twine, because you don't have elastic bands, do it really tightly, because what happens is as the juices in the stem flow down into the flower heads, the stems reduce in size slightly, and what can happen is they can just fall out of the tie that you've put in. You can always go back and retie them, it's not really a problem. But I'm going to tie that up anyway, as tight as I can. And then what I'm going to do is to hang it up to dry. Drying thoroughly may take up to 2 weeks, may only be a week. It depends what the temperature is like. So I'm going to hang it upside down, so that, as I said, the juices go down into the flower. I'm going to put it somewhere that doesn't have bright sunlight, that's slightly shady and quite airy too, if possible. I put mine on a clothes hanger I have hanging from the ceiling, because I know it gets air around, and obviously I had to not put my clothes there, which would have been damp. So, but you could hang them if you had a clothes hanger, and then you can hang them in a cupboard. So anywhere that you can put them. So you have different bunches of different flowers all hanging up, drying gently. If you've got lots of bunches, try and keep a bit of a gap between them so they don't get tangled up together, because as they dry, they're going to be more delicate and not as robust as they are as fresh flowers. Here's one, exactly the same plant that I dried about a week and a half ago. And you can see how this quite large flower has now reduced in size. but it's kept slightly purpley colour, which is rather nice. You won't keep the bright colour. It will be slightly faded, but it is rather nice purpley colour. And it's quite delicate, as I said, but I can show you some other ones that I've done, which will give you some ideas for doing them yourself. Here's lovely bright calendula or marigold, beautiful orangey colour, but that's a great one for doing. And here's a bunch of them that I dried before. And although it's reduced dramatically in size, you've still got a rather nice orangey colour, which is probably good for autumn too. So that's a good one to do. One of the most successful ones that I've done is Achillea gold plate. You might be familiar with this. Lovely. It's really hard. I think that the harder the flower is and the stem, the more successful you're going to be in drying it. And I can show you here something that's been dried for 2 weeks. So it's still kept its yellow colour, which is great. Not quite as, well, almost as bright as the one that I've just cut this morning, which is this one in my hand. So this has really held its colour. It's also quite tough, so that's not going to fall apart in the months coming. Next to it, as you can see, there's a slightly purpley one. This was the white Achillea that you get out in the wilds, anywhere in meadows, places like that. And what's interesting, because you never quite know what colour it's going to dry into, is that it's gone from white to a slightly attractive mauve colour. So that was an interesting thing to see, even though the yellow has stayed pretty much the same as it was there. So there's lots of different plants that you can use. Let me have a look at something else. Yes. Now, you can dry shrubs as well. And hydrangea is something which people say, oh, we can dry that, that's great to do. So I've experimented here in drying it in different ways, either by hanging it up in the same way that we did with these annuals, like that. And another way which I found out about, where you just dry it in a vase. So you put it in a vase, again, the same thing, take all the leaves off, cut a lovely angled cut, because it is quite woody, so you need to have a good area for the water to go up. Fill it up halfway with water and leave it to soak up the water and to dry naturally in the vase with the water. And I think the result from doing it in this way is far better and superior. Can you see, this is a particularly good example, this bluey hydrangea flower, than what happened to it when I hung it up, where what you see is a quite dried up, papery, not very pleasant. And the same with the red one too. That's really lost its colour and done that. So that's a different way of doing it. Cut it on an angle, put it in a vase with water and just leave it to absorb all the water in there, and you'll have perhaps a more successful result with something like that. Also, I note that the one with the most firm leaves and petals, the petals, is a much better result here than this one, which is called Hydrangea Annabelle, which is beautiful when it's fresh, it's white, but has become quite papery. But actually that might look quite nice in the autumn mixed with other things. So that's another way of drying. There are all sorts of ways that you can do it. But some plants don't really need to be dried in that same way. So when you've got seed heads which were left after the flower has gone over, and this one, I'm going to put it against the darker background so hopefully you can see it better, is the seed head of an allium. Alliums are the round pom-pom-like flowers that we get early summer. Lots of them around, they grow from bulbs, but a lovely seed head to which I have not had to do anything. So that's a very successful thing. You just allow it to stay on the plant, on its stem, until the petals have fallen and it's dried out by itself. But it produces a really nice, interesting flower head or seed head. Other things that other plants you don't really need to try too hard with are, for example, these are seed heads of a grass, a carex grass, and they've got rather nice dark seed heads. And you can imagine, because you're not just having those alone in an arrangement, you're going to mix them with other things. So it's nice to have different textures as well. And I think people would enjoy looking and seeing what they could use, or they could be picking feathery seed heads of grasses, which come from pampas or any of the ornamental grasses or any of the natural grasses that you have in your area. The only thing about grasses is try and pick them before the flower heads, which is this nice fluffy top, has been there too long, because they'll gradually start to shed. So what I did was I shook it on the plant to make sure that the feathery part of the flowers were not falling off. So then I know it's okay, it's in the best condition for me to pick it, and just leave it to dry by itself in a jar, no water, just generally keep it. Other plants have interesting seed heads as well. So this is Love in the Mist, Nigella, which is a hardy annual. You grow it from seed, very easy. I've got some of the actual flowers, although the plant is going over now, so you can't really see them terribly well, but there's the blue flowers. And there are the lovely seed heads, which are gradually going a lovely purple colour. And if we pick it before the seed heads open and release their seeds, then they'll keep that lovely round closed shape and won't open up and shed the seed, which is what we want. And I've done exactly the same again. So that's Love in the Mist Nigella, which is a really good one. Poppy seed heads. Again, I'll put them against here so we can see them clearly. Poppies open up and shed their seeds at the tops. So I've made sure that I've picked these ones before they ripen enough to open up and shed the seeds. So again, I can keep that lovely round shape, interesting texture. And although I did hang them upside down, it wasn't particularly necessary. I could have just put them in a jar and let them dry by themselves. But this way, at least I know they've aired and they've dried, so there won't be any moisture. Because we're going to keep these flowers, hopefully, for months. And we don't want any moisture, because that will begin to rot the dried flowers, so they won't dry properly. So we need to really dry them thoroughly to get them going. Another good one, a bit prickly, is teasel, which grows wild, is a wild flower. In fact, this one actually is shedding its seeds, so it may be a little late. Very prickly, so you have to be careful. But these lovely, again, lovely shapes, which will look fantastic, put in wreaths, put in flower arrangements, used later on in the season. So there's a massive amount of plant material that we can get, and we just need to get it just at the right time to enable us to have such a wonderful selection of dried flowers to use either at Christmas time or to use after, when there really is very little of interest around. If you're storing them after you've dried them, and I would say keep your flowers hanging in the airy space that we talked about for about 2 weeks. That should be long enough to dry them out if they're small. If they're hydrangeas, which we were talking about earlier, it may take a bit longer to dry them thoroughly. And you want to thaw them. I got this old tissue paper, which I obviously had something wrapped in. And what you do is you just put it in and wrap it just very gently, so that they're not going to bang against anything. And then you can put them in packed cardboard box. and then keep them until the time is when you decide you're going to make some arrangements. We will be doing a class or a session on using dried flowers in the winter later on, so that might be a good thing to keep them till then. Put them in a cardboard box again so it's dry, and perhaps write on it what you've got inside if you can remember what the plants were. But that's a great way of just storing them so that it keeps the dust off and just keeps them nicely tidied away. Another thing that you may have noticed while you were walking around looking at the plants that you think would be good for drying is that some of them may have already gone over, as we say, and produced seed heads. So that leads us into the second part of what we might do in the garden. As we go round, we're going to be looking and seeing what seeds we might want to collect, especially some of these annual plants that we've got here, which we want to sow again for flowers next year. So what do we do about collecting the seeds? Well, we take a biggish old envelope, whatever you've got, but it should be a paper envelope. And again, do this on a dry day, not on a wet day, because you want nice dry seeds. And you take the whole of the seed head. So can you see here, I've got stems with seed heads on them. And this is calendula, or the marigold that we were looking at before, this lovely orange one. These are the seeds here. They've formed at the top of the flower, the petals have fallen, and the seeds have begun to fall. So what we need to do, having collected it in whole, is to take away what we call the chaff, which is what all the bits we don't want that are around the seeds. And so we just gently shake it out and see what comes off. So it's quite a fun thing to do. One of the fun things is to see the different shapes of the different seeds from different plants, because they can be completely different. So these marigold seeds are little curved seeds. And so what we can do is just take away any bits which we don't want, keep the seeds we do. Now I've put it on a piece of paper so I can see the seeds. And also it means I can kind of collect them too. Now sometimes people say you can gently blow away the bits that you don't want, but it's quite difficult, and then you end up blowing it all over the table. But once we've collected these seeds and got rid of the chaff, the bits we don't want, so there's another one, I'm going to turn it upside down and just gently rub my finger over it. And again, the seeds fall off and leave the husk behind that we don't want. So we're just going to take the little bits of dried plant off. So I now have quite a lot of seeds. So fantastically economical too. Why keep buying packets of seeds every year when you've got them yourself and you know what you've got? So I've now got these seeds. I'm not going to put them back into a big envelope like that. I want to put them into a smaller envelope that I can. There's some more in here that fell off, so I'm going to tip those out. There we are. I'm going to put them in a smaller envelope. Now you could just use any small envelope you have lying around, but if you haven't got any small envelopes, then maybe you want to make one with the group, because it's a fun thing to do. But the important thing is to write what it's called. Now I've written on my big envelope that I collected marigold, French marigolds. So I'm going to write that again on this one. But I will show you how to make it. So let's put our seeds to one side and see how we make it. Now there's a fact sheet for this as well as a fact sheet for how to dry the flowers. So You don't have to write everything down as I talk about it, but I'm just going to show you. It's so easy. Now you can do it with coloured paper, wrapping paper, anything you like. But all you have to do is to have somewhere on it that you are able to write the name and the date of the seeds that you've collected. So you always have a reminder of what you've got. But basically, it's very simple. You number that, you have it in front of you. Number 1, 2, 3, 4. Fold 3 to 1. Then you number again. 1, 2, 3. And as I said, there's a fact sheet, so don't worry about having to write this all down. 3 goes halfway across between 1 and 2. 1 goes halfway across as well. And then we just tuck what was 2 into there. And what we have now produced is a very handy little pouch. So it's a great way. I did this with a square of paper that was 8 inches by 8 inches. I basically got an A4 piece of paper and just folded it over and cut it so it was a square. You can do it by 6 by 6 inches. That's 15 centimetres by 15 centimetres. Really, it depends on the amount of seeds you've got. You don't want to make anything too big, but also how big a piece of paper is manageable or better for people with dexterity problems. It might be easier to have a bigger piece rather than a smaller piece. So I'm going to write on this marigolds, and I'm going to say I collected them in August 2023. Seeds can last quite a long time. So it may be that I don't use them all, or I want to keep them to another year. So if I've got a year, at least I have an idea of when it was that I collected them. So I've written that on there. I'm going to put the seeds in. So that they're nice and safe. And then I can tuck this bit over as well, tuck it in. And there you are, it's enclosed. Now, we always have to remember that seeds are living things, although they don't look like they're living, they are actually living things, plants. And so it's almost as if they breathe wherever you put them, which is why we never store seeds in plastic bags, because what happens is moisture builds up and then they rot off. So having them in this convenient paper container or a paper envelope is the best way of keeping them. And then what we need to do to keep them so they'll be fresh when we sow them is to put them somewhere cool. So I would suggest putting them in a fridge. And what you can do, where you can use plastic, and it's just one of these old fruit containers, is just use that just to slot them in so that you can put a whole row there. You don't need to cover it, because as I said, we don't want moisture staying in there. And we put them in the fridge, and that keeps them in the dark and keeps them in a nice cool temperature so that we don't have to worry about them going off. And you do that with lots of things. Now, that example was quite easy to get the seeds out. I'm just going to see if some of the other ones I've collected are a bit more difficult. I collected cornflowers seeds. Now, that is not such an easy flower to obtain the seeds from, because the seeds are sort of feathery. So they're very small, so it's quite difficult perhaps for you to be able to see. But what I'm going to have to do is to be able to pull the outside, which is not the seeds, and get the seeds out, which are very small feathery seeds. Now this one may not quite be ready. If they're not quite ready to come out, and they're not coming out easily, then maybe what you should do is just leave them in their larger paper envelope to dry off a bit longer, and then come back and have a go at trying to get the seeds out when they've dried, because it does feel a little bit, not damp, but not quite dry enough. So I'm going to leave those and look at perhaps some of the other ones that I've collected as well. So those I can leave and remind myself to do them perhaps in a week's time and check. So what else have I collected? Well, we have the poppies that I'd shown you as dried seed heads to use for ornamental ideas. And what I did was I went back a few weeks later, and there are the poppies with their holes around the edge, quite difficult to see because they're hidden. And out of those holes come the tiny, tiny poppy seeds, which I hope you can see they're absolutely tiny. If you think of poppy seeds on top of buns and things, they're absolutely tiny, tiny. And then you can just have fun banging to try and get them out as well. Some of them, I've got a huge amount that have fallen out. You get hundreds, which is fantastic. Look at that, they're coming out, masses of them. And of course, we can always use these again as part of a decoration. So they can just be part of our dried flower decoration once they've let their seeds out. So masses and masses of seeds. So they're easy to put in an envelope and label. If you can remember the colour of the poppies, that's always useful. But remember, poppies and date, so we know. But poppy is very easy to collect. You just don't want to leave it too long so that they've left their seeds on the ground where they're growing. So you keep a beady eye on what's happening. When you know that you want to collect them, I'm just going to pop them back into my envelope because I haven't got a little one available this minute. But I've made sure poppies, I've written on it, and as I said, we can use these lovely ones as part of our decoration, so they can stay in there and wait for later. Okay, so we either collect the poppies, these seeds straight away because they're ready to be packaged up and put in our container, or we leave them for a while in their, somewhere dry, in their pack, just to let the seeds loosen up and dry up so we can use them. Now, what do we do about using the seeds? Well, the main thing is to know what you've got. So you can always look up the plants in a dictionary or online and to see when you should be sowing those seeds. If they're hardy annuals, which most of these are that I've picked, they can either be sown in September, but probably easily in spring instead, on a nice bare patch of ground. Or if you would rather, and you don't want to specifically sow them into an area that hasn't got anything else in it, but want them to be scattered through the garden, what you can do is literally what we call broadcast, which means just toss the seeds around the area you want them to grow. Now, so it's not difficult to do, or again, as I said, in the spring, perhaps not in the winter because they're likely to rot off, but it's quite easy with hardy annuals to sow them and be successful. And as I said, then you're going to have a continuing amount of plants from then on, which is fantastic. So hopefully that's helped with seeds, but there's just one more thing that I wanted to tell you about for making interesting winter decorations, whatever, is using leaves, because we've been talking about drying flowers and not having leaves on them so that we've got the interest of the flowers. But what we haven't talked about is what you do about having leaves in your autumn decorations or winter decorations or spring decorations. And this is something that I learned from florists, and it's not more difficult, but it's a different thing to do. You can preserve, so it's not drying, it's preserving. You can preserve foliage by adding glycerin. Glycerin is a substance that's perfectly safe. You can buy it in a chemist because it's often used as part of beauty preparations, or you can buy it online. It's a viscous liquid that goes into the system of the shrubby leaves that we've bought, or cut rather, and preserves them. So what you do is you mix 1 part glycerin to 2 parts hot water. Because the glycerin is quite viscous, we need to make it thinner so it goes into the stems that we've cut. So by adding hot water to it, mixing it up, then you can put it into a container. For the shrubby evergreen or deciduous material that you cut, and I'm going to show you the interesting effect of doing that is that it keeps it preserved for years, literally, but it also turns it into a bronzy dark colour, so which is quite interesting to watch. So this is alder. I went round these paths near to me and picked it, and this is what alder looks like normally, a bright green colour. But what's happened to it is it's become slightly purpley colour. And this is a lovely way of having nice foliage to mix with your dried flowers later in the year. And as I said, this will literally, once it's taken up the glycerin, it can be kept for years and used for years. So the best results I've had with it is using deciduous or tree stems that lose their leaves. Has worked incredibly quickly. Within about a week, it took up the glycerin and changed colour from green to this purpley colour. But you can do it also with evergreens. So this is laurel. There's normal laurel, green, and here is, it's subtle, but a sort of bronzing almost of the leaves, especially you can see it on the back too, the difference in colour. And that's quite fun. So that was quite fun to do. I did it with viburnum as well, and that changed colour. And the most interesting thing was doing it with ivy, and I hope you can see that. You can see the colour change where the glycerin water has been absorbed into the system of the plant, and it hasn't quite got to the edge of the leaf. So currently you've got a sort of bronzy colour as it travels through the veins of the leaf to get there. So this is another thing to do, which is quite fun. It doesn't cost very much to buy the glycerin. As I said, you can get it from chemists or you can get it online, but it's very nice for keeping, as here, deciduous tree stems as part of the decoration or the background for putting against your nice dried flowers. And we'll, as I said, we'll be looking at that later on and looking at how to make dried flower arrangements and wreaths and so on. So I hope that's helped you think about how to gather plants to dry, and also at the same time how to pick, how to get the seeds as well. And remember with the flowers that you can do it all the summer, so it doesn't just have to be now, late in summer. It could be that some of the flowers that you want to keep and dry are at their best in the early summer. And that's when, remember that you need to pick the plants when they're at their best, not when they're going over, when they're at their best, and then hang them up, dry them somewhere airy and shady, and you should have lots and lots of lovely dried flowers. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing all your arrangements.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That was great. Now we're just going to open up to questions for Caroline. So if you do have any questions, I can see there's some in the chat already, but if you do have any, just start popping them in the chat or raise your hand and you can voice them. I'll just give Caroline a second to get settled at her computer, and then we can start on the questions. Great, Caroline, are you ready for some questions?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so the first one from Helen is asking if you pick all the hydrangea flowers to dry, will that limit the amount of flowers that she gets next year?
That's an interesting thing. I mean, I think probably the rule of thumb with any of the dried things that you take is don't pick all of them because partly you want it still to look nice. It won't, because actually the hydrangea flowers are formed in the wood or the material that's behind. So, in the spring you would cut off the dead flower heads back to a couple of buds. So it wouldn't really. It's just whether you don't mind having a hydrangea bush with no flowers on.
Okay, fab. That's great. Helen's giving a thumbs up, so that's good. Next question. We've got a couple of questions about glycerin. So does glycerin work well with ferns?
Sorry, ferns. You know what? I haven't tried ferns. I think you should try with glycerin. Yeah. You have to give it a go, I'm afraid, with most things. I haven't seen, and I have been looking at different florists' websites and so on, and I haven't seen anybody doing ferns with it, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't try it. And I think to a certain extent, any of this is a bit trial and error, and you have to see how it's going to work. So don't have to buy the glycerin and then only do ferns, do something else as well. So, you haven't wasted it.
Okay. And Pam's asking, do different tree stems need different lengths of time in the glycerin solution?
Probably yes. I mean, that was quite an interesting experiment I did where the deciduous, so the alder, and what else was quite quick? Oh, I had viburnum as well. They both absorbed, I think because they're deciduous, so they're pulling up the moisture through the leaves. But the leaves that were more evergreen or more had a stronger cuticle took longer. So it's a matter of, again, just seeing how it works. So you can, as I said, the deciduous ones took a week. The ivy, which went in exactly the same time, is now a week and a half, and it's only just getting through the leaf. So it's probably going to take longer the thicker the leaf is.
Okay. Joyce is saying, I know you mentioned that drying seeds take sorry. I know you mentioned that dry seeds last a long time, but how long is long? So how long do the seeds last for?
Quite a lot. I mean, I can't put my finger on it because they found seeds in the pyramids with the pharaohs that they've managed to germinate. So that just shows you how long. I mean, literally, seeds can last for years if they're kept in cool, dark conditions. The longer you keep them, the less likely they are to germinate, but you literally can keep seeds for several years and be fine.
Okay. Do larger seeds like nasturtiums need a longer or different process in drying out?
No, I wouldn't worry about them.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry about them. They're so robust, nasturtium seeds. They're so easy. The other thing you can do with nasturtium seeds, if you're not bothered about where they go, is you can literally toss them around and broadcast them straight into the soil. You don't have to dig holes. But obviously, if you want to keep them, say to put in pots and things like that, fine. Maybe just keep them out for a week in a paper bag just to be sure they're dried, but it should be fine.
Pam saying thanks so much. Can't wait to try some of these ideas. Would verbena dry best hanging or in a container?
I think verbena bonariensis, are we talking about the sort of purpley flowered verbena? I think because they're a herbaceous perennial, I think they'd be fine upside down. I didn't try them because most of mine died this winter that went. Unfortunately, it was so cold. And I've only got new ones and I didn't want to cut them back. But they are definitely a flower that's good for drying. And I think hang them upside down, I think they'll be fine.
Okay, yes, she says yes, thank you.
Pleasure.
Do we have any more questions, or has anybody tried drying flowers before and had some success with them that they'd like to share? Feel free to just raise your hand or unmute or put it in the chat.
I had success with thistles.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and they were from my grandma's grave, actually. So it was a nice memorial. And then I managed to use them as an inclusion in my glasswork as well. So it's really well preserved.
Fantastic. No, that's fantastic.
That's great.
And Pam dries hydrangeas every year. Well done.
Straw flowers working well just now.
Could I ask a question, Caroline? That was really, this is the first time I've ever logged on to one of the sessions, so I'm thoroughly enjoying connecting with some fellow gardeners.
Good.
I'm deliberately growing flowers for cutting this year, and they're in full bloom just now, which is wonderful. But I grew straw flowers for the first time, and they seem to be my absolute favourites and have come up really strongly. But one thing I'm not sure about is, when's the best time to pick them for drying? Because at every stage they feel ready for drying, and I'm wondering, should I be waiting till they're like fully opened and get the full benefit of just looking at them in their fresh state before trying and dry them? Or should I be, do they open up after I've been drying some as I've been going along, but I'm enjoying looking at them in the pots as well, so I don't want to cut them too soon.
No, I know that's always the dilemma, isn't it? I mean, they are a great flower to grow because, as you say, they've got that kind of crisp feel about them, so they almost feel dry anyway before you start. The only thing I would say is don't leave them open too long, because then they've gone to the point where you might start losing the petals when you hang them upside down. So if you can, I mean, you could take a few at a time, really, couldn't you? And just pick them when enough of the flowers are open, sort of just open, really. That's really when you need to do with most of the flowers that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any last comments or questions that anybody would like to make before we finish up? I think that might be everybody. Caroline, anything else, Caroline, that you want to add before we finish up?
I was just going to add that I am doing, although there's a fact sheet on drying flowers, and there's also one about making the little pocket for the seeds. I am adding to the one about drying flowers to make a list of the plants that are suitable, in case people aren't quite sure of what plants to use or seeds to grow, and also to put in the details about using the glycerin and so on, just to remind people. So that'll be ready shortly.